Dear learners, today we are going to have a panel discussion on working women in Sweden. What are the circumstances in which they work and what are the privileges given to the Swedish women? As you know, Sweden is an advanced and developed economy and has a tradition of gender parity in the society. So given in this background, it will be interesting for you and also important for you to know what are the differences and commonalities between Swedish and Indian economy and how women workers are situated in both these economies. Today for the discussion, I have with me from Sweden Dr. Linda Lane, who is Senior Lecturer with Department of Social Work, Gothenburg University, Sweden. Welcome Dr. Linda. To begin the discussion, let me ask you Dr. Lane that there have been several social reforms introduced in Sweden in 1970s to draw in more people where both the parents or both the people are earning. So what has been the influence on individuals regarding employment and household labor?
Well, I think it's very important to mention that the 1970 reforms were preceded by two very important pieces of legislature. The first one has to do with eliminating the possibilities for men and women to be taxed conjointly. So from the mid-1970s, men and women in families were taxed separately. So I'm taxed on my income and my partner is taxed on his. That's very important. And the second reform is about parental leave. It made it possible for all working men and women to have the right to parental leave, and also it formed the basis for childcare policy. So we improved the quality of childcare, making it available to a larger sector of the population, while at the same time making sure that parents, when they are having children, have the economic possibilities to stay home with them for at least 1 year. So those were the three major changes in the 1970s.
Then let's talk about the parental leave provisions, which were, I believe, improved upon in 2002. Like in India also, we have provision for maternity leave, and also paternity leave has also been introduced in only public sphere. But in private sphere, we still don't have this provision of parental leave, especially paternity leave. So how is it that, what happened in 2002 then?
Well, it wasn't a major change. What actually happened was we opened up the possibilities for both men and women to be able to take parental leave. This is by making sure that the replacement rate in the insurance was 80% of your income. And this is, so if you earn $100 a month, then you would receive a replacement of $80 a month. Of this, of course, this is in the equivalent of Swedish crowns. And this is available to all members of the society, men and women, and both in the public and private sectors. So it's open to everyone. And in this respect, it made it much more available to both men and women.
The trend is that most of the time, mothers take up parental leave, not the fathers. Lately, it has been seen that there is a rise in parental leave to be when it is availed by fathers. So what has led to this change?
Well, I think the primary focus behind this was the women's movement.
Okay.
But also fathers or masculinity movements were also becoming very popular in the late 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s. So in 1995, Sweden introduced the first Daddy Month. So this was 1 month of parental leave that was designated just for fathers. And as a result, almost immediately we had about 8 to 9% of all fathers taking up this 1 month. In the early 2000s, it was improved so that fathers could take up to 60 days of parental leave.
Okay.
And if the fathers didn't take the leave, then they would lose it. The family would lose the possibility.
Okay.
So this has improved the ambitions of fathers to take more leave, because then they can contribute more. But it has also made it possible for companies to see that it's all right for fathers to be absent as parents, because we have in many instances in Sweden where fathers are discouraged from taking parental leave by the culture of the company they work for.
Okay.
Real men don't take care of their children. So it's taken a bit of time, but now it's improving, and now about 25% of all men take some parental leave. The number of days that they take rose in the beginning, but has declined slightly as more men have taken up more parental leave. So it's more men taking leave, but they're taking fewer number of days.
There has also been a trend that fathers usually take more days off coming of first child in the family, but with the subsequent children coming in the family, they just withdraw from this responsibility. So what may be the possible reason behind this?
Well, I think in this case you would find it's a class dimension.
Okay.
It has a lot to do with social class. If you are from the working class strata, it could be about culture, male culture that inhibits it, but it also can be about the kinds of work that men and women in the working classes perform. We find that in the middle classes, this is where you have the largest or the greatest amount of equality, where men take the most number of days, and they also take more days even with subsequent births.
Okay.
And among the working class women, you will find that many of them tend to decline from full-time employment to part-time employment.
Exactly.
After the first child, which means that they are more time in the home, and the fathers maybe don't feel that they are as necessary to taking care of the child when the mother is at home for a longer period of time. But in the middle classes, you don't find this. So it's a greater impetus for sharing in the middle classes than it would find, say, in the working classes. Yes.
So you mean to say that the phenomenon of part-time work is also class-based in Sweden?
Yes, in many respects it is. I wouldn't say that it is 100% so, but we are finding that among groups of women who are more educated, the more educated they are, the less likely they are to be working part-time. The lower you come in the educational strata, the more increased are the possibilities that women will be working part-time, not men.
Yes.
And sometimes this part-time work is involuntary. Women would prefer to work for full-time, but they are not offered full-time employment. So we are finding this, for example, in nursing, because nursing is shift work. You work at a hospital, you work a certain number of nights. So for hospitals, in order to facilitate the laws about working time, they are more likely to not offer nurses 100% full-time job, but somewhere between 75 and 85%, which means that they work perhaps 10, 12 rotating week schedule, around 80 or 90% of full-time employment. On the average, I think we should say that even women who work part-time in Sweden tend to work between 30 and 34 hours a week, even if it's part-time.
Okay.
So we have only a few percentage of population of women who are working less than 20% in part-time.
Oh, that is very interesting, Dr. Elaine, because what we understand in India about part-time work is that the person is working for less number of hours per day, maybe every day of all 6 days of the week, but not 8 to 10 hours, which is the requirement. But what I understand from part-time work in Sweden, it is different. Can you throw light on the kind of part-time work which is being offered, because you have long part-time work
Yes.
and short-time part-time work,
Yes.
which we don't have in India.
No, and I think that the Nordic countries are a little bit different in this respect. In Sweden, often we read, oh, the Swedish population works a lot of part-time. But it's so, I mean, in the European context, 35 hours or more is a full-time week. So if you're working between 30 and 34 hours, you're nearly working full-time.
Okay.
So for many occupations, this is more or less the norm. For women who are working what we would have tradition call part-time work, you know, working just 3 hours a day or 4 hours in the morning and the next day 4 hours. These are often in the service sector. You would find a lot of women employed in these areas in shops, as cashiers, as
Sales girls and all.
yes. And even those who are working in these positions would prefer to work more hours.
More.
But they are not being offered more hours.
Okay. Women would like to work full-time, but they don't get opportunity to work full-time.
I would say the majority of the women who work part-time would prefer that. There are a number of women who actually prefer to work part-time. So not every woman who is part-time wants to work full-time, but more women would prefer to work full-time, yes.
Oh, that is very interesting, Dr. Lane, because in India, more women would like to go for part-time work, but they are not offered part-time work and they have to work full-time because of the compulsion of taking up work.
Yes.
So that's a very interesting, difference between the two.
Yes, it is.
Then I come to my next questions, that although there is equal opportunities being given to both men and women in terms of education and employment opportunities, but why do we find more women in Swedish economy taking up feminized occupations or professions?
Well, I think you would have to look back to the Swedish, well, to Scandinavian history, because when we started to develop the welfare state, we had full employment among males. So if you have full employment with the male workforce, and you're going to embark on a social program that is going to open up the market for child care, for elderly care, better schooling, you need workers who are going to fill these positions. In the Swedish and the Scandinavian countries, you have small populations. So if all the men are employed primarily, the next resource is the female, to help females come into the labor market. So I would say that the reason much of the public sector is more dominated by female labor is because they both emerged at about the same time.
Okay.
So that is not to say we did not have nurses before, you didn't have doctors or teachers before, but with the explosion of interest in learning and the construction of the welfare state, these services become open for a larger proportion of the population, which means you need new schools, new teachers, new hospitals, new doctors, new nurses. And these were the places where women went to work. It also opened up the possibility for middle-class women to come into the labor market, who would not normally have come in as laborers, but they would come in as teachers, doctors, skilled and semi-skilled labor. Yes. So I would, it's no excuse that it is that way, but I think you can identify the structures that supported it in the growth of the welfare state.
In India also, we have more women who are absorbed in public sector than in private sector, because the public sector it takes care of all the legislative provisions which are being provided for both men and women. So do you also see the same phenomenon happening in Sweden, that public sector adhere to the legislative provisions and private sector do not adhere to it to that extent? So that is why the pull is more in the public sector.
Well, I think if we go back to the point I was making earlier about the historical development of the welfare state, I would say that in the classical period, when it was when the welfare state was being formalized and constructed, lots of money coming in from the public.
Which was that? Around
from the late 1950s, and I would say until the mid 1975, around that period. So this is the classic development period where Sweden was experiencing, phenomenal economic growth, and there were possibilities to build out this welfare sector with childcare, etc. After that period, there were periods of decline, so that now since 2010 or maybe even earlier, around the turn of the millennium, we're starting to see a diversity in the provision of services that had probably earlier been provided by the public sector. So we are finding private sector entrepreneurs getting into the schooling sector. We are finding private entrepreneurs in childcare, private entrepreneurs in care of the elderly. So the sector that was formerly dominated by the governmental sector, if you will, the public sector, is becoming more and more diverse. Are we seeing any changes in the gender structure there? Primarily no, but it's early days. It's very early days. So I think if that question is asked again in maybe 10 years, we will see some differences.
I come to my next question, which is about flexi timing. In India, the concept of flexi timing means employee is allowed to make changes in the work timings. Suppose the set timing is 8 to 6. So it can be, the flexi timing means the person can come at 7 o'clock and leave early, or the person can come say 9 o'clock and work till 8 o'clock. But what is the concept of flexi timing in Sweden?
We have exactly the same kind of concept, but it's divided into 3 aspects. We have flexi time in this traditional way, where you can start between 6 and 9 in the morning and finish between 4 and 6, I think, in the evening. This isn't open to everyone.
Yeah.
To be able to use flexi time, you have to be working maybe office hours. It's very difficult if you're a nurse. If you are working in a shop, you can't say, well, I'll come in at 12 when they need me at 10.
Okay.
So flexi time in the traditional way is very much something that is organized for people who are working in very structured forms of labor, in offices, etc. But we do have other forms of flexibility that is both available to other categories of workers and which can be both positive and negative.
Okay.
It's positive when the workers have some say about the way the schedules are made, and it's negative when the employer makes the decisions about how the workers should work. So for men and women who are working in shops, if they are part of the process, decide, well, okay, our hours will be between 8 and 4, and then the next day I work 4 to 6 or whatever, that is good if they agree. But if the employer only says, you come these hours, you have no choice, then often it's not a very good thing.
Yeah, I can understand. My next question emanates from your point here, that what has been the impact of flexi timing on working women especially?
Well, it depends. I mean, if we're looking at flexi time in the traditional way, it's gender neutral. It's good for both men and women. It's no problem. If I work in an office and want to flex, it's great. But we are finding that there are many more women who are working in service sectors where flexibility is very rigid, where employers retain the power to decide how you can use your flexibility, which means that this is often detrimental for women, because if they have children and their childcare opportunities doesn't match their working time,
exactly,
it's a problem.
It's a problem.
If they're working evenings or weekends, there's also a problem. Of course, men in families do a lot of caring when the other partner is working. But for lone parents, for example, it is very difficult.
Very difficult.
Or for men who are single parents, which is a minority in Sweden, but they do occur, it's even more desperate. So we're finding that these categories of workers who are often in low-paying sectors, which means they don't have a lot of resources, they are dependent on extended family for care of children, care of elderly, and as a general support for family. So I would say that while flexibility has been important for some groups and has improved work-life balance for some groups, it has not been as positive for people who have little choice in the way their work is organized.
How will you explain the phenomenon that flexi timing is more used by mothers than fathers? Is that so?
Again, we're talking about what you're going to use the flexi timing for. So if you're just an office worker, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, and it doesn't matter if you have children or not. It's available to everyone.
Oh,
yes. So it's not offered on the basis of parenthood. It's based on the fact that you're an employee.
Okay.
So anyone can use flexi time. But where the difficulty occurs is if the woman, and because the fathers tend to have traditional work days, it is the women who have the heaviest caring responsibilities. If the flexibility isn't found there for her, then there will be problems, yes.
I have also read that there is a provision that parents can visit their children during, work hours.
Yes.
Does it qualify flexi timing, or what kind of arrangement is this?
This is different. Flexi timing is based on employment, while this possibility to visit your children or have your children come to your job,
exactly, yeah.
To take days off to go on excursions with your children if they're doing things in school. This is a part of the parental leave arrangement in Sweden, which, as I pointed out before, is open to everyone. So you're allowed to use your parental leave up until the child is 8 years old. So since children start daycare when they are around 2, so you have the possibility to take days off from work to go and be with your child at daycare, or if the school is having excursions, or if for some reason the daycare center is closed because the personnel is doing training. So then you can use the parental leave for these possibilities. You can also, as a parent, you have the right to reduce your working hours for the period up until the child is 8 years old. So if I prefer to work less than 100% and use my parental leave insurance benefit for that, I'm allowed to do that, and my employer is required by law to allow me to do so. So we're finding that a lot of mothers and fathers nowadays who have children under 8 use their parental leave in this respect. Some take a few days at the beginning of school term, some take a few days at the end of school term, some maybe around the Christmas holidays, to just stretch out this parental leave days until the child is 8. If you manage to get child number 2, then of course you can use them until that child is age 8. Okay. So that means you have more days, and it provides an opportunity for mothers and fathers to spend more time with their children. So that is the reason, and it is open for all parents. It has nothing to do with where you are employed, if it's in the private sector or the public sector. Every parent has the same rights, and you're compensated at the same rate.
That comes to my next question, which is, in India, childcare facilities is one sector because of which most of the women are not able to take up gainful employment outside work. How does it work in Sweden?
childcare is offered to all children from age 1. There are not very many children that young in daycare centers in Sweden. But if a parent, for some reason, absolutely needs childcare from 1 year old, then it is possible to arrange it. In most cases, children start daycare around about 2 years, when they're about 2 years old. It is open to all children. There's a cap on how much they are allowed to charge. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe for our average family with 1 child in daycare, the rate for a month is about 100 euros. I don't know what the equivalent would be here. Maybe about 8,000.
What is the percentage of income which is spent on childcare?
Everybody pays the same rate.
Yeah. What I mean to say is that is it too high for a family to afford childcare?
No. Childcare is very much affordable. So 100 euros a month for a full-time daycare is about 7,000 rupees or something, 8,000 rupees per month or so. And that's, given the wage levels in Sweden, that's not very much. So every family who needs childcare can afford to have childcare. There are a few restrictions. If you are unemployed, then the community does not have to give you full-time childcare, and that is, of course, no reason. You don't need it if you're unemployed.
Is childcare services sponsored by the state, or do you have private players offering these services?
We have private players offering the services, and there are a growing number of them. Childcare in Sweden is high quality. Even the public childcare, it's very well organized with qualified early education teachers who are leading the work there. The number of children in each daycare group is relatively small. The private actors are following, and they have to follow the same laws. Early education is deemed as part of preparation for schooling. So even the private entrepreneurs have to follow the same teaching and educational plan as all others. So it's even the private care is very well organized. What they do in complement to the public sector is offer diversity. You have a diversity of ideologies, different ideas about early childhood education. We have daycare where the children 85% of the time are out of doors. They're out working in the nature and environment all day. Even if it rains, even if it snows, even if it's really bad weather, they're still out of doors. We have Montessori schools. So there is a variety, and I would say that the private sector at this point is more adding to the diversity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lane, for being with us today and sharing experiences from Swedish society, Swedish culture, and also Swedish economy. And I am more than sure that our learners would have really got a very insightful picture of what is happening in Sweden, especially vis-a-vis women workers. Thanks and take care.